Hello, inquisitive minds and enthusiastic learners out there. Uh, Join us in a space where knowledge becomes empowerment. Now, that is who we are, Westward for Business. So, welcome to another interesting session, a Westward for Business Ignite session. And I'm Diana Pereira, a training consultant at Westward for Business, and your host for the day. So, for those who are joining our session for the first time, let me quickly brief you on WFB Ignite. Now, this is a series of online workshops and webinars organized by Westward for Business. These sessions aims to provide virtual training solutions to bring the competency gaps within organizations in the best way possible. Now, primarily, we are there to address critical issues within the organizational context through professional development programs. WFB Ignite sessions are designed to be relevant and responsive to the current business trends and business needs around the world. And these sessions are led by WFB trainers who are professionals and consultants with years of industry experience. And today's WFB Ignite session is on project management, enabling organizational agility through effective planning and execution. And the session is facilitated by our very own Mr. Thomas Dembski. Thomas Dembski is a seasoned senior professional having over 30 years of cross-sector corporate and governmental experience. He has held a variety of executive management roles for both private and public entities, including several large multinational corporations. Thomas has served as an advisor to startup organizations in healthcare, technology, retail, and food and beverage, and as a mentor for state-sponsored incubator and special focus programs. He has also been an adjunct instructor for both under and graduate students. So before I hand over the session to Thomas, I would like to remind you all, in between the session, feel free to send in your comments, get connected with us, and give your suggestions over the chat box down below. And you may post your session-related questions under the Q&A segment. So, without further ado, over to you, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Diana. And good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining our session. Okay, just to refresh what you would have seen in some of the collaterals here, what we're going to try and take away from today's session and gain an understanding of the advantages of embracing a project management culture, regardless of where you participate within your organization, small and large, where you are within that, whether you're a finance person, a marketing person, a facility management person, etc. Project management has a lot of key applications that I've leveraged extensively over my career, regardless of the size of the organization, the structure of the core organization, or the sector. You can find something within this framework and this thought put that you can certainly contribute. So I'd like to get across the point of embracing the flexibility of project management and how does it help you meet specific requirements. And also, I just touched upon a wee bit, the cross-organizational tie-ins and how they can be enhanced, how they can be improved, and help you measure how you're proceeding along within your organization, goals, strategic planning, budget management, and of course, the key core component, the execution of the project that we're discussing at that point in time. Talking about a framework, I'm going to do a couple introductory comments, which I've already started. And then we're going to walk through some organizational applications, and then just some basics about what we would expect to see from a project manager as the core responsibilities, touch upon some methodologies, some bases of choosing a methodology, and then we'll do a deeper dive into some of the common project methodologies and techniques, some of the tools, and then we'll have a question and answer feedback. I would urge you, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, either go through the chat or through the Q&A. Diana is going to be monitoring that, and if anything key comes up throughout the initial parts of my discussion, ask some questions. We'll have a Q&A session towards the end, and I'll probably take a pause somewhere in the middle of today's discussion if there's any salient questions to address. When we talk about project management, what are the key things that we're talking about here? Again, sometimes it's state the obvious, but Project is an endeavor. It's an expenditure. It is an aspiration of any organization, great and small, to accomplish a task, build something, develop new levels of services, etc. So when you think in terms of a project, it's an executable. It has a defined beginning, a journey until we get to a defined endpoint. And so regardless of the methodologies that we're going to look at today, that's the fundamental. We're going to spend money, time, effort to accomplish a task, whatever that task may be. It's going to be a beginning, a journey with several milestones and hopefully measurable events, and an endpoint where we have a product, a service, a go-to-market application, etc., that we've accomplished. So project management and the core techniques is a core vehicle for that interface between those of us who may be requesting that a project be accomplished. We're looking at marketing campaigns, we're looking at project deliverables, etc., that we had that communication between good folks who are doing the hard work, building, developing, designing, crafting, and the teams in between that will communicate to owners, senior managers, our clients on progress, how we're doing. So they measure two directions. They're measuring what we've committed to, what our aspirations are, measuring how the operational teams are doing with that, letting the end user understand how well we're doing, and that journey in between. So the key interface with the project management team is to establish a measurable and definable communication vehicle so we can understand how we perform financially, performance-wise, KPIs, smarts, RACIs, all the different measurement techniques that you may be coming across and what your particular organization may use can fold very easily into a project management framework. And so when you're choosing that technique, ensure that you're accurately assessing the scope, complexity, and the requirements, because those will drive potentially the type of methodology you're going to utilize. Each industry, each sector, a lot of deliverables will have a core development or core project methodology application that makes the most sense, that works best for that style or that type of a project that we're going to be talking about. Consider that, and this is an important bit. My core in the last 20 some odd years is in the evaluation governance stages. So when I think in terms of projects, I think of everything as a project. Anything that's going to be a cost or going to generate revenue, going to change the way that we as an organization are doing our businesses, restructuring, has, in my mindset, has a project component to it. It's got a logical beginning and an aspiration how we're going to close that project off. What are we delivering? You think about capital expenditures, budgetary expenditures, expansion initiatives. These can all be viewed in a project basis. And oftentimes, when you incorporate, again, my experience has been when you incorporate things as a project, you have a better communication channel, you have a higher level of accountabilities, and it certainly enhanced transparency with what's happening within your organization, what's happening with your interface with your clients. Because there's that tracking, there's that defined methodology of communication from all users, whoever the receiver of the project or the service may be, to the folks who are performing the services. So keep that in mind when you think in terms of projects, that every level of spend, every budget category, you can really look at it as its own unique little project that move and interact with other aspects of our organization. Building upon that, when we think about organizational applications, those who are going to be delivering the projects, you can think in terms of fundamentally external projects and internal projects. Now, externally, you can think about contracting revenue management. And when you think about that, we've made a commitment as an organization. We are going to build a bridge. We are going to develop the software package, etc. We are doing something that has a defined commercial tieback. So we're going to look at milestones. What have we committed to our client to perform or complete at a certain period of time? How are we going to define our billable instances? Usually they tie right back to a defined milestone that we commercially committed to. If we say it's going to be a 5-year project, at every 20% of the completion, we're going to have a billable event. So that's going to require the communication between the organization's finance department, who's going to be initiating the bill, the client side, who's going to be paying the bill, And those folks in between are project teams, our interfaces with our client that are saying and agreeing with the client that we've completed 20% of the work. It's got a commercial tieback per our contract, and on our deliverable, our project sheets and our project planning, we've agreed. You as the client and us as the deliverer of the service or the product have agreed that we've completed this 20% and we sign off on it. And it allows us as an organization who's delivering the service to recuperate our finances, what we've spent up until that point in time to deliver that project, that service, that et cetera. We look at delivery compliance. We think about our statements of work that we've agreed to, our service line arrangements and agreements, et cetera. Every level of a contract has a commercial tieback, obviously, and on a well-defined contract and service agreement, it'll have a direct tieback to the client that they can have something to sign off on. And I'll highlight here that from a commercial standpoint, don't be afraid to have too many details in your contracts. It helps you define billable events as the provider. Oftentimes you'll see commercial entities that they're going to want to do it in chunky blocks so they have a larger swatch of revenue to charge. But the larger that commercial deliverable, the more tasks potentially that could be there, particularly when you're thinking about a large scale project where you may have 15 or 20 tasks that need to be completed before that billable event. If you can break that down to say 5, you're looking at 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. So it's a lot easier to get that completion signed off on. A lot easier to send an invoice out to your customer and get that work in process into your accounts receivable so you can convert that into revenue. Keep that in mind. And that leads directly in when we talk about cost management, because every project, every initiative from an organization is going to have a budget assigned with it. We have a $10 million or 10 million dirham contract to deliver a service to a client, and our cost basis may be 70% or $7 million. So we want to manage our costs so that we can convert that $7 million into $10 million of revenue. Okay, so that's a key thing. So we're managing our budget to perform those services, complete the project. We're going to tie that directly back to our commercial contract that has a key milestone that we get sign off on, and we can convert our costs into revenue. Be mindful. And many years ago, when I first started doing a lot of heavy work into the project management stream, there was that lack of a business focus. And I'm going to build on that a little bit here. External projects being delivered by our chief operating officer and their good teams want to do the best work they possibly can. And historically, there was an oversight within the delivery teams to keep a management side or financial awareness that they are managing a slice of the business. Because yes, we sold the product, we sold the service to a customer. Now it's our job to deliver that. There's a financial tieback. We're managing resources, whether they're hard resources, third-party resources, or human resources. There's cost involved to the organization that's delivering it. We're spending. We want to do the best work that we can, but it needs to be organized. It needs to be clearly communicated, and it has to have those touch points with the other departments to say, we're doing great, we're delivering, we can charge. We're not doing so great. Maybe we're not performing up to expectations and it'll cost us a little bit more money. And I'll go into this a little bit more in detail later, but it's a key component. How are we performing from a project standpoint? Are we ahead of the project planning? Are we behind? Are we going off track with our deliverable? Are we on track? Is there some way we can adjust the ship or refocus our resources to get back on that track to be on budget, a little bit below budget, billable, deliverable, and you meet all the protocols of the contract, and you have a happy customer. That's all part of the communication channel. Again, the last little bit here, quality and lessons learned, of course. When we complete a contract, you want to have the close-off sessions with your customers. And that's something that's been very much in the practice for the last 20, 25 years, that you have that voice of the customer that you're going to listen to, whatever the project may be. Marketing campaign, we built a bridge, we developed an application. Do we have a happy customer? Are they going to be a repeatable customer? Did we meet our objectives of the commercial contract that we committed to? Project management team will help us to measure accurately that we've received sign off from our customer that they're happy, that the happy customer pays their bills. We are getting our costs back and we are delivering the project as we've committed within expectations? And then again, we had that opportunity to revisit that and see how did we perform? Did we perform above expectations, at expectations, or is there room for improvement? And that's a cycle we're going to go throughout. Internally, again, I mentioned a little bit earlier that internal projects are as important many times as your external projects. We're looking at transformation initiatives, whether we're going to restructure our organization, meaning that we're going to maybe outsource a certain application. So if we have a finance department or other support service department, that we may consider exporting that or using an offshore resource to perform those services. That's a project. We have a team on board. What are we going to do with that team on board? Are we going to reallocate those resources? Are we going to separate from our staff members? There's a cost and there's a lot of intrinsic touch points within that. There's a human resource element within the organization. Hey, we've just outsourced 25 people, and some of those were my friends. How is that going to be communicated internally? It's a project. So there are many stages. Some of them are core financial, some of them are operational, and you have the qualitative and the quantitative measures. So you can use project management techniques to evaluate those type of initiatives. Again, we could be looking just at the inverted. We want to add a service internally. We may be offshoring our marketing. We want to bring that back in-house. How do we do that? How many resources are we going to add? Where are they going to sit? Are they going to sit with our sales team? Are they going to sit with our marketing team? Are we going to grow a marketing team? Who are they going to report to? And that's worked within our structure. So that's a transformation, that's change management and workflow management. So we want to understand how are they all going to tie back? How are we going to update potentially our ERP systems, our enterprise resource planning softwares, whatever scale, large and small, that we're changing our core fundamental way of operations. So there's effort involved there. There's going to be IT people involved. There's going to be finance people always involved. There could be a change in our in our procurement flow, other supply chain elements, vendor relations, costs that are going to come on board now that maybe we weren't thinking about so much because we had a nice flat fee for an offshore service. So when you're thinking about changing something internally, it is certainly a project. And oftentimes, because it doesn't have that potentially dollar for dollar measurement, it gets lost in the shuffle. Having been through many transitions, whether it's through acquisition, via merger, closing a certain level of the operation or service that we provided for many years, onboarding new services, it's change. And if we don't manage that change properly, it gets expensive internally. And that's why when we look at internal transformations, different projects, we want to have a keen eye on the cost, the processes, and have them measurable and communicated from our internal customers to our enactors, our transformation teams, to our senior management teams who maybe ordered or requested those changes up to the board level. Again, it's all scoping about how we go through the process of communication, delegations, but small and large transformations are expensive. It could be a process refinement, a training initiative. Again, I mentioned marketing, sales as plans. So keep that in mind. Any effort that you are going to spend time and resources on, whether they're payroll people or not, if they're working on a change pattern within your organization, they're charging their time, they're spending effort doing something else than their core remit. So you have to pick up the flux someplace there. So there's a potential cost there. And we have an endpoint of our future mode of operation within a large scale transformation that we're operating this way today. We want to get to a different mode of operation in 18 months, 24 months, whatever the measure may be. And there's that journey in between. Key that we have those measurements. How are we doing? Are we on schedule? Are we ahead of schedule? Are we spending more than we planned to? Do we have the resources to accommodate? So be mindful of all those things when you're looking at organizational applications. I'm just going to touch a wee bit on, I'll go through this quickly. These are just some things we can always look up. What are some of the core remits for a project manager? And there's 5 things that we look at. When we're talking about initiation of a project, we've identified the stakeholders, those folks who may have requested or are impacted by the project activities. Could be a customer, could be an external customer, an internal customer. Okay, so we want to understand who are the key stakeholders in this project that we're going to be initiating. We're going to plan this project. Okay, so looking at the detailing, the scoping of the project, that is going to drive what technique we may use, what measurement devices we may consider, and how are we going to report that both directions to the receiver of the services of the product, to the delivery team that are working those projects, and the folks who are the stakeholders who have a responsibility. Again, think about your smart charts, your RACI charts, your KPIs, whichever vehicle we use to measure our performance. Everybody in that train, in the chain of communication, needs to be aware, and it needs to be transparent. We also look at the execution, monitoring, and the closing of the logical project. So when we're executing it, again, it's going to be a recurring theme with me is communication. And again, over the last, I've been at this for over 30 years, the incorporation of project management techniques within all the different sectors and streams that I've worked within, communication cannot be understated. And the role that the project management teams, their delivery teams, their management, up to the director levels, is vital. It's that communication of how are we performing today? How are we performing tomorrow by expectation? What's our projection? How are we going to perform this? Are we ahead of plan? Are we behind plan? And historically, how have we done so far if it's a current project? Or how did we do if it's a completed project? We're going to monitor. Again, I always go towards the cost. How are we doing with our budgets? How are we doing with our costs for each level of tasking? Again, because projects go sideways quickly if we're overspending. You know, that's the old saying, when you overcommit and underdeliver. Underdelivery tends to happen when the projects get over budget. We are spending much more than we expected to, so our delivery of the product or service may not be up to commitment, because now it's gotten expensive for us to deliver and perform our services. So having a keen insight into how are we spending against the delivery, the planned delivery, will give the reviewing team or the governance teams real insight into we're doing great, we're ahead of schedule, we're on budget, and here are the measurements that we've been looking at. So we want to monitor, constant monitor, and have those two-way discussions and communication channels. And then once we've achieved that, we're going to close our projects and we're going to go on to the next bit of service. So it's either handing over a project to one of our clients. You know, it could be a construction. We've developed a building. It's a turnkey solution. Constructed it. We've done the foundations. We follow all the logical chains. We've done the infrastructure, the MP works, etc. We built a bridge, those kind of things, and it's ready for delivery to our customer. We're going to hand it over, assuming all along that we've been getting sign off and we've been able to have those milestone billings. We've had customer satisfaction throughout, which is demonstrated by their sign off and commitments met on payment terms. And now we're at the final stages that, you know, there may be some bugs to work out at the very end, but you have that last 5-10% of a project that you've worked through. You've completed the project, had the customer, they've signed off on it, they've paid, and you move on to the next project. Again, what did we do very, very well? We're going to communicate the project successes to all our teams, the delivery team. Job well done. You've done great. We could have done this better, or you've exceeded expectations. You know, we have those discussions. You know, did we do great? How can we leverage your success to another project? What we didn't do as great as we would have hoped to have done. What could we have done differently? Where did we go a little sideways? Were we on budget, below budget, or did we exceed our budget spend? All those measures are hugely important. So we want to have those conversations when we close off our meetings. So the PMs or the project managers are a vital part of those discussions. They're the folks who've been tracking the activity throughout. They've been getting sign off, and they've been doing the measurements and communicating within the organization, whether it's an internal or it's an external project with our clients. Now we're going to talk a little bit about and lean into when we talk about project management methodologies. And this is getting a little bit more into the meat of the discussion. What is a methodology? It's a practice or technique that provides a framework. Okay, when you think about frameworks, it's the way we're going to go about doing our jobs. Within project management is core fundamental delivery vehicles. I'll go into a little bit more detail in the following slides of how we're going to address that task, that project that we're going to commit to. We're also going to take a look at the responsibility of the planning, managing, executing, and monitoring the project life cycle. Okay, I'm reading right off the chart here. So, you know, again, communication, choosing the right tool for the job at hand. Certain methodologies lend themselves to certain types of projects. It's a scaling, it's a scoping, it's the size of the project, the nature of the project, the teams that we have. And so when we talk about choosing methodology, we're going to look at our timelines. What industry are we working within? What's our budget? The complexity of the project, resources, and communication. What do we do well? What is the nature of the project? Are we building a building? You're going to look at a certain type of methodology. Are we developing a software application? We're going to have a methodology that best fits. And again, then there's hybrids, of course. And what are we doing? Is it an internal project? Identification of the stakeholders. What industry are we working within? Software applications have a very different methodology than construction companies do. You may think we have a beginning and an end, but the cycle in between those, in its project initiation and the project closure, are quite different. The way that we go about measuring those, the way that they're managed are substantially different. So what's the complexity? What's our timelines? The key thing that often can get lost here is the availability of resources. When we take on new works, again, whether internal or external, do we have the resources available to do the project, to complete the project, to do it in either as per our commercial arrangements, as towards the stakeholder aspirations or initiatives for their goals, strategy, and objectives within maybe a strategic plan for an internal change of business, etc. So do we have the people? Is it a complex thing? And what's the timeline? What is our measurable thing? Is it a 12-month budget? Is it a 24-month budget? Is it a 6-month project, etc.? So your toolkits that you're going to use and the methodologies you're going to apply using those toolkits, really you want to consider these 5 or 6 rather key elements here. When you think about more advanced, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the techniques now. Advanced project management techniques, and these are better suited, you could say, or more traditionally suited for large scale projects. Okay, these are things that, and these are the techniques that have existed for many years, and they're the tried and true that don't always work so well in the current environments for certain aspirations. But when you think about dependencies, we're building a building. Okay, so what do you have to do first? You bore the ground. How's the foundational level going to be set if our ground isn't secure? If we don't have check the water levels potentially. What's the watermark for where we're going to put up a high tower? So, so they drill down. So that's the first step, suitability of the land. Then they do their digging, they lay the foundations. So suitability, start laying our foundations. We construct around, we start working on infrastructure. Logical steps, you complete one. This is the waterfall technique. So you complete a step, you're satisfied, it meets what you are setting out to do. You go to step 2, step 3, step 4. And each step can have several tasks underneath it. But these are completions that you're trying to do to say, step 1 has 20 tasks, say, and each task has to be complete so we can get to step 1's sign off and move on to step 2, again, which may have several tasks. They could be concurrent tasks, things that are happening, in the same timeline, but they have an interdependency to maybe you have to complete step 1 and 2 together until you can get to step 3, or stage 3, or phase 3, or milestone 3. Okay, so these are terms of art that we define, and that's team by team. They have different vernacular or words they choose to use to define these milestones, but they're steps, they're stages. I think in terms of a waterfall, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, A, B, C, D, E. Okay, define, requirements, execute. There's these different stages that we're going to assign to this waterfall. You can see on the right corner, just in an infographic, that we're going to use for a more advanced project. And this is more tried and true. We've seen it quite a bit. There's a workforce breakdown structure, which is more like an org chart kind of thing. It's a hierarchy. And that's when you have main objective and it's got its tree underneath. Okay, so you're going by task, tree, task, tree, task, tree. So it's similar, but not quite the same. And then a critical path methodology, which is one of the more complex, and I've never used it extensively. We've always done, in my history, mostly waterfalls, because a lot of engineering projects, construction projects, big project deliveries that you need to have that sequential delivery. So historically, that's what I spent the most time on. The critical path is going to go start to finish, start to start, finish to start, finish to finish. It's a matrix of sorts. The people little diagram here is showing that it's kind of like a web. The more complex, certain softwares lend themselves to that, and certain types of projects are well suited for that. It's not what I'm going to focus on today, but when you think about complex builds, what are we actually doing? These have core dependencies. Step one is a dependency to be completed, so step two can initiate. And you think about maybe more common or basic, they're calling it. These are the agile methodologies. Now, they're basic in so much as that they don't look big. I think that's the easiest way to say it. When you think of a Scrum or you think of a Kanban, they are very heavily used in software development. The last 4 or 5 years, I've been spending a lot of time in startups and a lot of tech companies. They are all about agile project management. So why? Why do we use the agile methodologies? Why are we doing scrums? Why do we like Kanban? They are more independently managing moving pieces within structure. So it's not that you must complete A before you get to B, or step one before we get to step two. There can be concurrent activities. When we talk about scrums and the Kanban, you can think in terms of maybe sticky notes. Here's a task. Here's a task. Here's a task. And it's very basic. We have a backlog. That's our to do. We have a work in process section, which I'm going to call are doing or in process, or we're doing, and then it's completed. That's your conversion. So you think in terms of the traditional financial terms, you think here's our backlog, here's our work in process, and here's our delivered product. They have the same methodology than Kanban, but they're using cards to represent that. It's visually appealing. It's very individually task driven, and it's easily assignable, and it's communicated very, very well on online sessions and different things because it's very graphical. Similarly, you can say the same thing about the scrums, and that they are short bursts. In this little chart here, I just did 3. Okay, and I'll get a little bit more detail on later, but you are consistently performing all the tasks that you would see in a traditional waterfall to get to a certain deliverable. Think about MVPs, minimal value products in a software application. Get it to market. Version 1, a beta version. It's not the complete vision of the product, but it meets a requirement. We want to get it to the market. We want to communicate what we're doing as an organization. And the startup tech companies use these extensively. Here's a V1, here's a V2, here's a V3, or V11, V13, a V14, whatever iteration that you have, consistently reworking that process. These developers and these go-to-market folks, they're speaking daily. They're daily Scrum sections. They work in sprints, what they call. I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but they are going for quick, therefore agile. So we're doing things quickly to get to market capture, market communicate. So quick deliverable, quick deliverable, quick deliverable. So their final endpoint is more that the final endpoint after several scrums or several completed tasks that are comprehensive would mirror effectively the deliverable in a waterfall. The waterfall took all these defined steps, whereas in a Scrum or an Agile framework, you're completing a product, a V1, a V2, a V3 to get that at endpoint. Okay. And this is where I was just chatting about what's the difference. When we talk about a complex versus a basic infographic, think about those key definitions. Okay, what's a waterfall? What we say requirements, design, development, testing, deployment, a big outcome at the end. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And underneath each one of these, you're going to have tasks. Defined tasks, subtasks. That goes up to the delivery managers many times. Generally speaking, you want like I touched upon a wee bit earlier, you want your deliverable tasks to have some reimbursable financial trigger. We've committed to do X, Y, Z per our commercial contract. Let's make sure that we are meeting those objectives and we can bill to get some of our money back. When you think about larger projects, these are, again, most of my career has been in the commercial world or internal delivery mechanisms. So we're looking at these waterfalls because certain steps need to occur before we can go to step 2. If we're going to open up and we're going to initiate a new ERP or financial package, the comprehensive enterprise resource package, certain steps need to be followed so you can get to that final deliverable. We are live with our Oracle, SAP, Dynamics package, whichever software they were going to implement, that we're ready. And we did our concurrent testing, and we've done business requirements. We've spoken to our delivery people, our user groups. What do they need? We've designed it. We've started our vanilla installations, and we start customization, if any, or we're putting bolt-ons on so that we're at that long-term project deliverable. Again, the bridge building, the construction sites. These are very, very defined, and waterfalls lend themselves towards that. And then you'll get Gantt charts and things like that, which I'll share a little bit. How are we doing those levels? Excuse me. And then within the Agile framework, what we showed, like circular. These same requirements, the requirements, design, development, testing, and deployment, happen several times. This infographic is shown 3. It could be many more on top of that, but it's do the basic development, get the product to market. And you, again, these days I'm working quite a bit with young entrepreneurs, either they're young folks or folks like myself who are young into the entrepreneur market, and they need to grasp or market grab. They have a great idea, a great concept. They need to get that information out there. Investors are looking for that. They want to see, okay, have you communicated your product? Is it working at a certain level? Do you have a beta version, meaning a not complete, maybe not fully monetizable, but it's a working product that you can share either in a demonstration, or you can test market and work within a small user group. And so you have a focus group here. They're playing, or they're using our beta package, and they're doing great with it. And these are the observations that we're getting back. Your daily scrums, your sprints, your other activities will help you get to that level. You're working with a user group, met with them. They found these things they love about the package, whether it's the UI or the UX, the user interfaces, and how the controls are working. Are they happy with that? Or would they like to see it presented somewhat differently? And we work with our development teams. Well, we got V1 out there, so maybe that's his first Agile deliverable. We've got a product out there. During the second cycle, we're looking at, okay, we've got this feedback from our user group. They like this, they don't like that. We get it to a version 2 or version 1.1 because we've made adjustments per communications that we've had from our customers or from our user group. How do we take that forward? We're developing. And in application development and methodologies, this is where the Agile framework of these little scrums are super helpful. And this is where you're going to see quite a bit within your young startups, your startup organizations, whether it's a med tech, a health tech, fintech, your Uber-like apps, anything that's going to have that key user interface that are going to have many, many, many iterations. It's constantly changing. So you're consistently looking through that framework to develop, listen to your customers, refine. So it's a constant development cycle. So these Agile processes work super well within that framework, as opposed to, like I mentioned, the waterfall, where you have maybe a much more rigid definition. So when you think in terms of usability, waterfalls, more traditional, longer, big ticket deliverables, your construction, maybe your internal changes. There's a beginning, middle point, and maybe many steps in between, but they're core deliverables. You have an endpoint that's predefined, and these are the steps. The Agile frameworks, they work a wee bit differently, that you're constantly changing and you're constantly renovating and innovating and developing your product. Okay. And I don't know, Diana, if there's been any questions, this is maybe a good time to take a little bit of a pause, if you think, if there's been any questions up until this point that I maybe should address, or I can just keep going forward with maybe some more of the toolkits and methodologies.
Thomas, I think you can go forward, and then at the end we can have the questions.
Okay, well, fair enough. Okay. So then, building on that discussion, and again, it's a lot of words, so apologies for that. We're going to look at some of the more detail methodologies and tools, think techniques, and depending where you do your research, a lot of this stuff is interwoven. One resource may call a technique a methodology, another resource may call a methodology a technique. And when you look at sites like Forbes, they'll say, okay, most commonly used project methods, and it goes on to detail method, technique. So keep in mind that there's a lot of interface, but you think in the core fundamentals, you have large scale waterfall-like projects that may be a PERT or it may be a WBS. And then you think about the agile frameworks with the Kanbans, the Scrums, and hybrids. And we'll talk about here PERTs also. It depends how they're going to flow and what is the right tool for the project that we're going to be taking on, right number of folks that we have on board to do the projects or resource management, etc. Just to touch back upon a little bit, revisit Agile. Again, it's widely used. And within the Agile framework, I've been highlighting Scrums, and there's a reason for that is because Scrums are the most widely used today. Tomorrow it might be something else. Again, it's a dynamic. But in current methodologies, we're looking at things that consider that Scrum framework, where we're doing initial activities, going through a cycle, we're delivering. Going through activities, a cycle, deliverable. And that's used by approximately 60%. And then some variant upon that, a Scrum band, which is a combination hybrid method, another hybrid method. And then we get down to Scrum is what, 80% or so here. So it's a big number. Excuse me. And it's a flexible approach. It drives collaboration, communication, and rapid delivery. Key thing, though, keep in mind as an oversight, when we're working in these task-driven projects and things that I've seen go a little bit sideways oftentimes is that you can get quiet. And meaning that if we have a development team working on an aspect of an application, if we're not as a team really having those daily scrums, those daily discussions, how are we doing? We're not measuring those effectively. We're not looking at a project as saying, okay, yeah, we're getting the lights at the end of the tunnel. We're achieving a deliverable. If we're not having those open discussions, projects can stall and it can get, that deliverable, instead of being a nice tight, say, several weeks, can become several months. And I'm seeing that explicitly in many of the startups that I'm working with. For a lot of different reasons, good reasons, bad reasons, but a daily sprint review, meaning a sprint is a short burst of a project deliverable, it is giving that communication. And that is a key thing for all our project management teams to be mindful of. We are here to communicate. We are here to share information, track deliverables, understand how we're doing, and communicate. Are we on schedule or are we behind schedule? We have investors in our application. How close are we to V11, V2? We've done the MVP. Have we done the MVP? We've made a commitment to get a product to market. We've shown them a nice slide deck. We've had the 2-minute conversation on the elevator, all the terms that you hear in your seminars that you go to. We've secured potential funding. Now they want to see some traction. How are we doing? So you want those commitments to be met. You want those communication channels to be open and fluid and dynamic. Agile lends itself to that, but it has to be managed. So we have to have those regular communication channels. Preferably is daily. You want to understand how are we doing. There's lots of softwares to help us track those things. Okay, going back onto the Scrum. What is a Scrum? It is a key component. It's the most widely used agile technique. It's in short cycles. They call them sprints. And when you think about sprints in athletics, we run the 100-meter dash, etc. So what do we do in a short burst? So this is an activity or a task that needs to be completed. We sprint. And we're going to measure those. And these sprints are part of the cycle, and they're part of the agile tracking methodologies. So we need to, update our user interface. We want to get a different graphical. We want to add some buttons. We didn't, the user group that we're focused on, our focus group, they don't like some of the sizing of the buttons. They don't like the color graphics. So one of our bursts, one of our sprints will be, let's work on that user interface, because our feedback from 90% of our participants in our group has been negative towards certain elements of our UX, our user interface, UIs. How can we change that? What do we do to change it? We identify, and then we start going through a cycle to get it done. The sprint can last roughly 1 to 2 weeks. Again, these are estimates. We don't know that specifically, but you want to keep them short and in bursts. That's the methodology. These are considered to be short bursts. So you think about 1 to 2 weeks that we're working in a sprint. We're having our daily sessions. We review it. You got a little infogram on the bottom here just to show here's a Scrum process. We have a initiation, it's a backlog of work to be done. And then there's the cycle, there's a feedback, and it goes to the next gate. There's a cycle, there's a feedback. And the backlog are these tasks to be completed, and then we have an output. So we run through the cycle many, many times until we get to our product. The final product, which again, in this world, particularly in the software world, it's never really a final project. You're going to be doing patch management. You're going to be doing development throughout when something may change. You're on a Microsoft platform, you're on an Oracle platform, you're on a whichever software platform, and there's a change to that core component. We have to change our application to make sure that it works well with that technology. I've worked on several apps where maybe they focus on Apple. So you have an application that works great on an iPhone. Well, you take it over to one of your Android based, whether it's a Sony or a Samsung, it doesn't look right. The imaging on the screen isn't right. And, again, for an application, it can't be assumptive. All our users are going to be on iPhone. They're not. All our users are going to be Android based. They're not. So you want to ensure that those core technologies that you're going to be delivering on speak, and that the application you've developed will work on your Android phones, it'll work on your iPhones, etc. It'll work on a Windows platform, it'll work on an Apple platform if it's a desktop or a laptop package. So we go through those iterations to understand how are we doing. Maybe there's a focus, Apple first, then Android, or vice versa. Whatever we've done our market analysis to say, this is what works best for us. And within that Scrum, this is where you get to the product owner. I'm the product owner. I requested an application. It's going to be logistics. Maybe I want to move products A to a location B, and in between there's a travel. How are we doing with that? So this is the product. This is the vision. This is what we want this product to do. Right? So I requested that. Now I'm the product owner in the development team. I've heard the expectations. I've understood the requirements. I've listened. We've developed a project team to deliver that project. Now we have to manage this. How are we doing from a product ownership standpoint? We have these level of tasks to do and manage those tasks. We have a project of activities that are happening concurrently. How are we doing with those? And how are we going to deliver those? Again, V1, V2, V3, iteration 1, iteration 2, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Again, you think in terms of agile, they kind of frame out together. And then it goes to the reporting side. What are we going to track? And whether we're going to use a Scrum board, a Kanban board, are we going to use a hybrid methodology, maybe use waterfall-like looking Gantt charts? I'll show you some pictures for that in a little bit. And then you think in terms of sprints, tasks are moved from the project backlog to the sprint backlog. So we're going, these are the high-level things we have to accomplish, and this is how we're going to go about doing it. So what needs to be done, the methodology, the sprint. We're going to break down that larger project backlog into smaller sprints, and these are works to be done. So the large backlog, things to be done, into a smaller backlog to be done at a quicker time. More, so maybe there's one big task or one big backlog item broken down into 10 sprints. Backlog, then it gets into the activity chain. So we're going back to the in progress. Okay, it's completed, it goes into the done. That's Kanban straight. What needs to be done, what's being done, and what's completed. To do, in process, completed. Think in terms of financial. Here's our backlog of work, here's our work in process, here's our billable event. When you think about it from a higher level or from the commercial elements, a lot of these steps in the process of a project have logical tiebacks. To do, being done, completed. Not billable, not spending, billable. Think about it in those terms, and some of us who maybe aren't core project managers, some of us like myself, I'm a core financial person, I want to know when I can bill something. If I'm working with my sales team, I want to know when I can sell that thing. When is that software going to be available for sale? These things need to be done. These things are being done. This is the V1, so it's not really a chargeable event. It's not a monetizable event until it's at a point where we've said it meets requirements and possibly get subscriptions and things like this. And you think about in diagrams. This is role assignments. I'm spending more time on Scrum because it's a very current methodology. Think about in terms of a product owner. So just kind of define a wee bit. The Scrum Master and the development team. they all work in unison. So product owner is looking at the whole project value. It determines what needs to be done and the priorities. So the product owner, we need to build this application. These are the things that need to be done, and I am here to help ensure that those are measured, communicated, and there's a completion cycle. So what the Scrum Master, who are these folks? What do they do? And they are looking at those individual tasks and projects, or those individual pieces, how they work together, and they are ensuring that they are actively happening. They are the hands-on folks. They have a huge component within this cycle. So I can be the high-level product owner, but the person on the ground working with the development teams who are doing the technical work, possibly in the software development. The Scrum Master is the person ensuring or measuring, having those communication and management meetings that we've done this today, we've done that today. This feedback is in the loop. This feedback's in the loop. So they are managing, potentially redeploying efforts to ensure that these deliverables are met to get to that first deliverable, first instance, first version, second version, third version, etc. A little bit more detailed chart here again about what goes into a Scrum. Again, we talk about planning. We talk about the daily Scrum, sprint review, sprint retro. We're going to do it again. And the three components. So you have the teams, you have the development. So you have the Scrum Master, the product owner, and development team, much like we showed here. So these three components, the owner, the Scrum Master, and the development team, how do they fold into one of these diagrams? Okay, and it looks a little confusing, not the prettiest chart perhaps, but it just shows it's a cycle. So we're going through the loops. So the team is doing their work, the sprints, sprint retros, they're doing again, is planning these sprints, and they're having a review session. They're looking at the sprint backlog, they're looking at refinements, they're looking at the increments of progress. All in all, you can see outside are the stakeholders, but they're not to be ignored because they need to be communicated with. So whatever we're doing within our project, we're running our sprints, we are managing the deliverables, we are looking at getting ourselves to that first core deliverable, the V1, the V2, etc., the beta version, have you. All this hard work is being done and measured by our project management team, being oversight rather, having the open communications, those feedback loops, and very, very critical in application development. Our stakeholders are out here and they need to be informed. And so that's where our product owner, discussing with the Scrum Master, is going to have that conversation. Okay, so that's their job at a high level. Okay. Leaning a little bit down to Kanban. Now, Kanban is sometimes considered, it's a little less detailed, possibly, than a Scrum, or it's a simplified version to a certain level. You can think in terms of sticky notes, works to be done, what's being done, and what has been completed. It really falls into three main categories. And so to do, doing, done. And where this works super well is in the visualization of the workflow. Works really well with maybe potentially simpler projects, but not, again, a tool is a tool. So whether it's a visually oriented one that's maybe more pleasing or maybe easier to address for non-financial people. Like personally, I love Gantt charts, but that's just my core. Big spreadsheets, lots of lines, those kind of things, open and close or midpoints. Key tiebacks, it's just been my my training ground. That's where I spent most of my career in. But these other techniques are certainly valuable. And again, it's tools, techniques, methodologies are as effective as the people that are going to be using them. There is an element of, this type of methodology is preferred for building, construction, defined deliverables and contracts, boom, 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 boom. But when you get into the more flexible arrangements and the more agile, lean, Scrum, Kanban frameworks, you want to have the right toolkit. So the user groups who maybe think in terms of tasks, or they think in terms of component, they won't get overwhelmed by this massive spreadsheet or this massive Gantt chart that has lots of colors, lines, tieback. They will see the tool. They're all smart folks. They'll understand the tool, but it doesn't draw them in. Again, right tools and the right methodologies for the project at hand, the resources at hand, and the scaling. What do we actually do? What's the nature of the project? So you wouldn't see that cards completed, to do. And it's something we can look up. It's relatively straight ahead. We can look at the 4 principles. Again, we can spend a little time on this, but I'll kind of just go through it. 4 main principles: start with what you know, agree to pursue incremental evolutionary change, processes, roles. Key things, again, it's kind of redundant. When you think about visualization, you want to limit your work in process, which is for every project, frankly. So if they're going to highlight it as a Kanban basic, work in process is what? Financially, unbilled revenue. So if we're a financial manager or we're the business manager side of the house, then project people really need to be keenly aware that you don't want a lot of work in process. Why? You are in the spend cycle. Work in process is unbilled revenue. Key element. And that's for when I mentioned a wee bit earlier about how project management methodologies and that interface with the financial teams and the other stakeholders is vital. The business delivers, the delivery teams, whether it's a technology, a construction site, those are core ones you always think about. Those are the most common you think. So we're either building something, we're developing something. They can get lost in the process of development sometimes to be perfect. But the key thing is we need to meet objectives. So whether it's in software, soft development, MVP, meet objective. So we can start monetizing. If we're building something, be on top of the working process. So Kanban facilitates that. And this is where these hybrid techniques are wonderful, that you could be using a more complex tracking methodology, but use a Kanban-esque or hybrid methodology to try and limit that working process. Again, we're spending. We need to monetize that so we can pay for these good works. There's no bottomless resource when it comes to capital, the cash. Okay. Here's an example of Kanban board. You can see, like, here's our backlog. What are we doing? What have we done? And what's blocked? Completed. Okay. It's a visually appealing process, and it's a chart that a lot of young entrepreneurs or new entrepreneurs like to do because it works very, very well. It looks like a calendar. And so it interfaces nicely that way. You can click on the boxes depending on the software that we may be using, and it'll explode it out a wee bit so you can have that further detail. But it's very basic. It goes, and it's color crafted sometimes. And there's many, many examples. It depends on who the crafter of the software may be. But the blues work with the blues, the yellows work with the yellows, etc. But it's a very quick visual toolkit that works very effectively. And again, when we talk about hybrid methodologies, like a Scrum button, what's that? Taking the Scrum methodologies and making it look like a Kanban chart effectively. So we're looking at those different steps, different sprints, and we're creating cards. It's visually appealing. It works super well on software and handheld applications, apps like ClickUp and other ones like that. They are user-friendly. The UI is great. So you're not looking at that giant spreadsheet to see, okay, where are we at with my task? And a lot of folks, when they build a big spreadsheet, it's going to be in an Excel or Google Sheets. And they get kind of cumbersome to manage, especially if you just jump in to see how are we doing on your daily meetings or your regular meetings. And you look at it maybe less financially technical people, or maybe less interested many times that, I don't want to see all that level of detail. How are we doing on the project tasks, these scrums, these sprints? And the more card-driven vehicles or the more card-driven methodologies and presentation toolkits work very, very well with that. Then we talked a little. I'm just going to go through it quickly here, so we have some time from the Q&A. But work breakdown structure. This works more in line of hierarchy. It's more traditionally looking. So you think about what's our basic project, our dependencies, and our sub-dependencies. It looks like an org chart. It's a very hierarchical tracking tool and methodology. Lends itself very well to being complete until we get to the next stage. So you can have many pictures like this. Again, here's one tree or one hierarchy thing for one task, second task, third task. And it works well, and you can create cards from this. And this is where it talks a little bit on the side here. We talk about the Kanban. Again, cards to define the different levels of this hierarchical tree. It's effective. And again, a big fan of hybrid. Again, what's the goal? Use the methodology to keep us on track. Choose the right tool for the project that we're working on. Have the right tools for the folks that we're working with. What is the size of our team? What are their capabilities? what do they react best with? Again, it's at the end of the day, most of these things are trying to accomplish the same thing. They all are. We have a project, we're going to complete it. And whatever the steps are in between, beginning and if there's iterations subsequent to that. But what is a toolkit that will work best for our organization, our user group? And that's hugely important. Everybody reacts differently. Okay. Waterfall, again, the tried and true. Boom, 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 boom. It's very detailed. Think in terms of linear. Okay. When you look at it, we define our requirements, our design, how we're going to implement, verify, and maintain. You can rename these steps, but these are the fundamentals. So you do step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. And you can have several waterfalls that have interdependencies. You can see some of the charts that they have hundreds of lines. Every PM, every project manager, project director, they have their comfort zones. I mean, having worked with a lot of engineers, I've worked with some project managers in the engineering streams that their workbooks were super detailed. Oftentimes too detailed. Why? How can you be too detailed? You get lost in the process of managing the tasks. And it's easy to lose sight of the core. You want to accomplish this. So a lot of times it's easy to look at the task or that step in the process, maybe it's gathering the requirements, as one chunky bit with maybe a few tasks to be accomplished or few levels to be achieved before we can say, yeah, we've done step 1. What you can see many times with some very technical people is they get to the very, very minutiae, and they're going to look at, instead of having maybe 5 logical steps, we have 25, 50, 100. I've seen massive workbooks. Technically impressive, but you can lose sight of those pretty readily. And if they're not tied back to some trigger, particularly if it's an Excel workbook, you're spending a lot of time on that Excel workbook rather than managing the project itself. When you think about the more agile frameworks, so when you move towards more traditionally focused methodologies, more towards and incorporating elements of the lean agile methodologies to try and bring them together a wee bit, make it less complicated. At a level, say it's a billable event, or it's a project step that we commercially agreed to. Oftentimes that'll get the job done. So we've agreed to meet with the customer, our internal customer, external customer, identify the needs of the business. Maybe there are 10 items that we've identified. That'll go into our tasks to be completed. So you've got 10 items to achieve. Now, those are the chunky bits that you need to achieve. Now, underneath each one of those, you may have here's finance, here's procurement, here's HR, here's laying the foundational framework, putting the MEP, painting, handover, what have you, depending on what our project may be. But there's a middle ground that'll work for your organizations. Now, again, it's a comfort level of the users. Again, they all work, whether we're super complex or we go for a little bit more simplistic approach. It's having that user group being able to communicate it effectively. Super complex things sometimes can get lost in the translation. So that's why I tend to veer to somewhere in the middle. I like detail, and I'm personally okay with it. But when it gets too detailed, some things can get lost, and you'll spend half a day going through a project workbook where you could have maybe spent 15, 20 minutes, half an hour to get the same output. Here's where we are, here's where we're deliverable. Here are our costs to complete that stage, because that's the billable event. I try to keep things tactile with the toolkits that we use, because it's that interface between the stakeholders, whether it's the client or the internal client, and the delivery teams. So you want to have that toolkit that's interfacing have a usable framework. Now, over here on the delivery side, super technical, and you want to ensure that you're meeting all your requirements, safety protocols, licensure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that can be very much more detailed. But when we're bringing it across and we're going to communicate that, you want to contract some of those steps down so they're easily communicated. It'll trigger some decision. It'll trigger a billable event. It'll trigger maybe a pivot. We're not going quite the way we'd like to see this project go. So consider those when you're developing your projects and you're working with the teams and the methodologies. You're going to choose how you're going to apply those methodologies. Okay? And tried and true Gantt charts. I'll show you a picture of a Gantt chart. You've probably seen these everywhere. Here's our tasks, a start date, here's an end date, and you're going to have this waterfall. And this is a simple one, very traditional. We have our several tasks to complete that are going to achieve our commercial commitment. It's going to achieve what we were trying to do internally. Task 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, time. So it's a histogram. Tasks over a period of time. It could be a short period of time, a long period of time. So keep that in mind when you think about your Gantt charts. Been around forever, and you can hybrid those things. Okay, come down like here. This looks even more complex, but the idea behind this particular chart is to bring agile components into that task-driven Gantt waterfall methodology. You can see how it's broken up here. Here's our sprints. Okay, so we have an agile project. It starts with sprints, sprint 1, 2, 3, and our backlog. So this visual Gantt, which may be more visually appealing to some of our large-scale project managers, this is just what they're used to seeing. It's a toolkit. Like anything else, it's the language that we speak well and what works for us as the reader. So maybe for us as a user group, we like the Gantt styling, but our delivery teams are working, say, let's assume it's software. They need to go through these sprints. They need to do the different activity bases. So a capture communication portal like this is going through the sprints 1, 2, 3, and it's backlogging it. So we're either going to have the completed elements, or we're going to have the to be completed, and these sprints are going to be within that. We're cycling through the circular charts that we shared earlier. Here's our cycle 1 deliverable, cycle 2 deliverable, cycle 3 deliverable, but we're visually capturing it on these Gantt charts. So again, it's the key component of the PM's role that, as I look at it, it is how do we communicate to our stakeholders, internal, external, and having the toolkits available that we are tracking the works that we're doing, we're following a defined methodology, we're keeping aware of what we're to do, how we're doing it, how did we do it. Took a project on, we delivered the project, and now we're going to review it. Many toolkits, many vehicles of communication, whether it's a Gantt, whether it's the Kanban cards, Scrumban, all these different toolkits, they're all very, very helpful. Again, it's defining the use we talked about earlier. What methodology makes the most sense for the project? What type of a project are we doing? What are the available resources, whether it's a hard resource, meaning folks or people, or the products, or the raw ingredients for a manufacturing entity. Human resources, our capabilities, level of our capabilities. Are we a mature organization? Are we a growing organization? Are we a steady state entity? Are we a dynamic entity? Do we build stuff? Do we develop stuff? Do we build buildings? Do we drive software? So these different packages and different methodologies have their strengths and weaknesses. And the key thing is, again, the combination of the methodologies and the thought put underlying are hugely important. And I think that's a big thing to keep in mind whenever we talk about project management. Okay. So I think we're at the hour and 10 mark. So maybe Deanna, some questions if we have any.
Oh, hi. Yes, Thomas, thank you so much for your time. We have one question. I will just read it out for you. This is from Sinan. He's asking, in a waterfall project, it was shown it is best for projects that don't change over time. What are the examples of that? Because usually we are used to have everything evolve according to time.
Well, sure. If you think about, excuse me, I mentioned like physical structures, right? They have little variability, and the components that are contained within a construction project don't often have, you can say, material or substantial change. So if we're building a site, we identify a site somewhere in our geographic that is land, we want to build a high tower. So there's certain steps constructurally that have to happen. You have to evaluate the piece of land that we're going to use. Is it stable enough, or does it have the infrastructure or the ground when they do the moorings? Is the land beneath where we're going to put this projected, say, 50-story or 100-story building? Can it sustain that? Are the water levels okay? So that testing has to be completed, right? So there's a stability for the build of the project. The nature of the project, are we going to add 1,000 rooms? What is the available potential sewage system there? What is the disposal for wastewater management? different elements like that. Are there zoning restrictions that we're proposing to build? So there's certain steps to building that building. We get our approval, say the government said, okay, or whomever the zoning authority may be, you can build your high tower on this piece of land. You have to go through that following process of, is the land suitable for our intended purpose? Has to happen, inflexible. Then you're going to build this tower by design. You've designed it, your architects and your engineering team has designed a certain structure. Your client has agreed to that structure. They want 100 structures. They want it to look like a torpedo. They want it to look like a box. They want it to look like a capital H. Whatever their aspiration from the aesthetic and the physical structure is, the size of the rooms, number of bathrooms, are they apartments, are they condominiums, are they hotels? What are the internal components that need to be considered? The temperature changes and what have you. So you've signed off on an agreement. We're going to build this structure. These are the specifications that we've agreed to. We're going to get paid for that. And the customer's happy to pay us and have agreed to it. It's relatively inflexible. I mean, acts of God, things can certainly happen, and codes can certainly change, but unlikely. Those are those with the force majeure issues, or force majeure is an event that we have no control over commercially. So if you've agreed to do something for a customer, and when I think waterfalls, I usually think more generally speaking, the rigidity is because there's a commercial tieback. We are going to get paid $10 million to do this project. Customer wants this to happen. We've designed it, they've agreed. So now we go through the processes of getting that job done. And in the construction, or it could be civil works, what have you, there are logical steps that have to be followed. So it's rigid. It's rigid. And so there's not a lot of flexibility to go through a wholesale or material significant change once you've commenced and you started that project. Hope that answers that question.
Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, I hope so too. We have another question from Joseph. He's asking, in traditional construction projects, do you use Scrum, or is it only for IT projects?
Again, thanks, Joseph. I would say that you're looking more towards possibly a hybrid application of the processes. Again, there are the methodologies that lend themselves to a certain level of project construction that we just talked about with potentially a high tower, or maybe your firm is doing civil roadworks. It's pretty well defined. Yeah, so you're not going to have that need to pivot. Whereas in software application development, the less rigidly constructed projects that we may be looking at, or that sector of business, they need to pivot. They need to be flexible. We made an application with a blue background. Customers don't like it. A user group don't want it. They want yellow, etc. So that's easily changed. And that's where these scrums, where you think in terms of sprints, are very, very handy. Having said that, it's terms that we use. Now, behaviorally, there's nothing whatsoever that stops you from having your regular meetings. Having those, what they talk about, the sprint daily review, or the Scrum daily review. You think in terms of what a Scrum master is doing, they're managing moving pieces, different elements of a project. Project managers are doing that substantially within a rigid framework or this flexible framework. Somebody just needs to be on top of that. So when you think in terms of development cycles, that lends itself more towards a product that is indeterminate and dynamic. Again, you hear it tons and tons in IT development, software and application development, less so in the construction sectors, because they are very, very rigid. They're commercially driven, they're code driven, they have healthcare issues, OSHA considerations, you name it, there's a consideration when you're building anything that's an infrastructure. It's going to house people. And so it has to meet certain requirements. But the process of having those daily sessions, or the process of having that open communication channel that you'll see more widely communicated when people talk about Scrums, Agile, the Kanbans, that there's nothing wrong with that methodology. Actually, I think it's very, very important. At a minimum, you want bi-weekly, I would think, maybe 2 weeks when you're doing a monthly cycle, for a lot of different reasons. Now, that is from, say, I want to look at the numbers. How are you doing financially? I'm a COO, I'm a CFO, I'm a CEO. How are we performing? Operations teams need to be in communication. They need to be tracking their projects. How are we doing? That just doesn't happen That's communication. Are we charging the right? This when you talk about business partners, whether they're financial people, HR people, other technology people that are partnering with a certain group that are to deliver an element of a project. They're talking, they're charging, they're putting their time against it. They may be using third-party resources. Construction could be using, something within supply chain and procurement teams. They are charging, they are purchasing, they're utilizing. Raw materials being converted to what? Work process into what? A final product that we can get paid for. So that is an open communication channel. Yeah, we call it a scrum. And you think IT, and you think, okay, that's happening within these little sprints. Great, wonderful stuff. Take those tools and apply them elsewhere. Scrums are designed to be a half-hour meeting, the Scrum daily sessions, the sprint sessions. They're short. There is nothing that's restricting to say, okay, I'm on a long-term waterfall rigid project that says we can't communicate more often. I wouldn't subscribe to that. Again, it's where personalities and team construction and the resources that you're working with, what works best for them. Some folks like to be left alone to a certain level, but that doesn't mean you don't have contact. We all have a manager. We all have somebody that is dependent on us or that we're dependent upon. If we're not talking, we're not leveraging the resources at hand, or potentially we're compromising the project. I could be way ahead of my team members. Well, that's great, but then why are they behind what's not working? So having that Scrum-like communication channels or those regular sessions or meetings, it's a wonderful tool, and I couldn't recommend it more highly. Again, with the core focus I tend to go back to, we are here to communicate with each other. Project managers, project directors, our Scrum masters, our team leads, they are there to have that transparency between customer and delivery service, internal client, external client. They need to be on the same sheet of music or the same Kanban chart. We're all on the same page. We know where we're at. And using the Agile framework as a communication vehicle is absolutely fine. Doesn't change the waterfall deliverables. It doesn't change those contract executable milestones. I think it helps.
All right. Thanks a lot, Thomas. And I would also like to thank all the participants for your time and obviously for the interesting questions and being here with us in our session. And once again, thank you, Thomas, for igniting us all by sharing your knowledge and experience with us. It was such an refreshing session.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I would also like to say to all the participants that your suggestions and your comments do really matter to us. So please do let us know what your thoughts and suggestions are, especially in terms of our improvement as well. So we can continue to improve and give you a better service. So after this session, you will receive a feedback form, which will take about 3 to 5 minutes for you to fill. So please complete it and let us know what you think. And if you have opted for the certificate, you will receive it. You will receive your e-certificate within the date. So which, once you receive it, you can publish on LinkedIn too. So see you again with another insightful WFB Ignite session. Until we meet again, thank you so much. Stay ahead, stay connected with Westwood for Business. Take care.